All right, welcome to the latest New Mexico DELT webinar. This is New Mexico DELT, the student engagement webinars. Today we're talking about part 2 of the Quality Matters rubric. We're really focusing today on the best practices in online education. My name is Cash Clifton. I'm one of the DELT master teachers. I will be speaking with you today. And just to let you know, this is a monthly series that is available, so feel free to join us anytime you'd like. We do record our webinars, and so they will be available at nmdelt.org if you ever missed a future webinar or if you would like to check anything else out from the past. As far as this meeting this afternoon, if your microphone will be disabled, if you have questions, please ask those questions in the chat box. I am not monitoring the chat box, but we do have our moderator here. It is Jamie. She's another one of the master teachers, and she will be interrupting me to let me know if anyone has questions or concerns. So please be sure and let me know if you do. So just a quick review of the Quality Matters rubric. What is it? It's an international organization, and that's the Quality Matters program. And what they've done is they put together a rubric as far as what constitutes a good quality online course, and that's the Quality Matters rubric. Why quality matters? It's so that we can certify the design of online and blended courses. It's so that we have a template for this is what a good quality online course looks like that's going to have a high level of academic integrity. NMDELT is currently developing a more thorough quality matters training process that's going to be administered through Google Classroom. For now, we have the student engagement webinar that broadcasts back in August, and that gives an overview of the Quality Matters rubric. It also gives an overview of Google Classroom. I'm going to suggest that you check that out if you would like a brief introduction to the Quality Matters rubric. I believe it was about an hour long. And you do have access to Google Classroom. I'm sorry?
I'm sorry to interrupt. It's just your screens aren't changing. We're still just
screens aren't changing.
Right. I'm just still seeing your introduction slide.
Okay, that's not good.
There we go.
That's not good. Do we have anybody with us?
Yeah, Barbara's actually with us. I have muted
Barbara's. Hi, Barbara.
But,
we're having some issues with sharing my screen right now. What do you see on the screen now, Jamie?
I'm seeing the second slide right now.
The second slide. Okay, I guess I'm going to have to go out of the presenter mode, and I'm just going to leave it in this mode here so I won't be able to go through my bullet points. Okay. Please let me know if anything is unclear in here, okay?
Thank you.
Let's see. So as I was saying, we do have the access to Google Classroom for all the New Mexico ABE programs. You're going to have an @nmdelt.org account. For now, you can contact Jamie at nmdelt.org. We're also currently working on getting a link up on our website as far as that process. Jamie, do we have that link up and working?
We do. If you were to go to, there's two different menu options where you can get an NMDELT email. There is the link for the Plato On Demand and for Google Classroom. On both of those, it says click here to get an NMDELT email account.
Okay, great. It's a great platform. I highly encourage you to use it. And again, check out my last webinar if you're not familiar with Google Classrooms. So I want to look at the 8 general Quality Matters standards, and I'll be brief on these since they were covered in the last webinar. The first standard is the course overview and introduction. That's how do you want to introduce your students to the class. The second is the learner objectives or competencies. That's where you are expressing to the learners, this is what you will understand by the end of the class. This is what you're going to be learning in here. The third standard defines how we deal with assessment and measurement. The fourth, instructional materials. The fifth, course activities and learner interaction. Then course technology, learner support, and finally accessibility and usability. There's also more information at qualitymatters.org if you're interested in seeing the original source, and I am going to have that cited on the references page here at the end of our presentation today. So online teaching, it's quite different in a lot of key ways from face-to-face classes. The The first thing is online students rarely, if ever, see their students. I don't think I meant to type that. I think I meant to say online students rarely see their teachers. So let me change that there. It's going to be entirely electronic, and typically the way teachers communicate with their students in online classes is through email, through instant messaging. That can be kind of impersonal, so it can be a real adjustment to the idea of not necessarily seeing your students really ever. Very often you'll never meet your students. Teachers and students can work anytime, any place. That's a good thing in a lot of ways, in my opinion. That's a bad thing in a lot of ways, in my opinion. I I think sometimes students can have higher expectations in terms of instructor response. Maybe they expect you to be like a computer and respond immediately when that's not really feasible. There can also be kind of boundaries related to that in terms of in a traditional face-to-face class, you have limitations of I start teaching at this time, I stop teaching at this time. If you have office hours, your office hours are a set time. Versus the online class, the class is kind of always with you. And so if you're not careful, it can really feel like you're constantly in class, like you're constantly working, like you're constantly teaching. So there's convenience there. There's also the possibility to kind of overwhelm your life with the extra time availability. Online teachers need different strategies to ensure all students participate. I think in any class, there's the danger of the students that slip between the cracks. Maybe they just like to sit in the back of the classroom, be really quiet, and hope you don't notice them. That still holds true in the online classes. And so as a teacher, you need to have something in place to make sure you're ensuring that all the students are participating. For me, that can be a little bit of a challenge because if I'm seeing a student every day, I'm seeing their face, I'm creating memories associated with this person. As opposed to in an online class, often it's just a name on a list. So you really want to have things in place to make sure nobody's slipping through the cracks. There's more individual communication with students. I personally enjoy that. The emails back and forth, the discussion postings. For some instructors, that can be kind of difficult, the amount of one-on-one that online classes require. Can be challenges related to innovation. You really have to be able to think outside of the box to run an online class successfully. You don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, still use things that work, but it can also be very challenging to take something that works in a face-to-face classroom and convert that to an online format. And so those things can just be challenging. Sometimes online teaching takes more work than equivalent face-to-face classes. I'm going to venture to guess that almost always an online class is going to take more time than a face-to-face class. You have to stop and think in terms of not only are you teaching the material, but you're also having to develop the actual platform. You're having to develop the actual class. You want things to be very clear for students, and so that can take a pretty big time commitment. Technical difficulties will arise from time to time. The issue that Jamie and I were having in this webinar here with the PowerPoint illustrates. Technical difficulties are just going to happen. You have to be ready to roll with them. Just because you have a technical difficulty doesn't mean you can just kind of bog down. You have to stick with these things, be very stubborn until they get figured out. And again, that goes back to the time commitment, is realizing that you're going to have to deal with technical difficulty. One other thing that makes teaching different from face-to-face classes is you end up working from home a lot. Again, that's kind of a double-edged sword. It's a good thing, and that adds some flexibility. For me, teaching from home is very calming because I'm able to have my dachshund right next to me as I teach, and I really like that. So for me, it's a good thing, but you know, there's the downside too. Those boundaries between home and work can become really blurred, and there's kind of a danger in this that it can feel like you're always at work, and that is not what you want. So just have an idea of how can I keep home separate from work while still teaching online, whether that means having time set aside to go work at school and go work in an office, maybe have some boundaries about I only work from home so long each day, just being aware that you need to pay attention to that kind of thing. Questions to consider before becoming an online instructor. I don't think online teaching is for everybody, just like I don't think face-to-face teaching is for everybody. So this is actually adapted from a questionnaire. I'll provide the link to that at the end of this in my references. But just some things to think about. Are you going to miss the face-to-face student interaction? I'm going to be honest, there's times I do miss the face-to-face student interaction. There is a major element of nonverbal communication that gets lost anytime you're communicating electronically, and I kind of miss that. I think it's a little easier to be a cheerleader face-to-face. So sometimes that is an issue. You want to ask yourself, do I have the necessary computer skills? I don't think that teaching online is for someone with very basic computer skills. I don't think you have to be a computer programmer. I don't think you have to be an expert on computers, but you do need some basic internet skills and basic word processing skills, and we'll talk about that later in our discussion today. You want to ask yourself, am I willing to research and learn new teaching strategies? You're going to have to come up with some creative things. You're going to have to be willing to try some things that you probably would never try in a face-to-face classroom. You want to ask yourself, do I have excellent time management skills? Keep in mind what I was saying about you don't want to feel like you're at work constantly. You also want to be modeling the time management skills for your student, as you don't want them to feel like they're constantly in your class working. You want to ask, do I have a quiet place to work? You may be video chatting with your students sometimes. If that's the case, you want a quiet place to do that from. If possible, I suggest trying to have a separate space in your home to work. It doesn't necessarily have to be a dedicated room, but maybe have a little corner with a desk and set a boundary there and say, this is the area where I do my online work. I don't do my online work anywhere else in the house. So just making sure you have that space to work. Ask yourself, am I a good group facilitator? I'm going to venture to guess that the fact you're a teacher means you're probably a pretty good group facilitator. But the research does indicate this is something to ask yourself before becoming an online teacher. Am I willing and able to give prompt feedback? Keep in mind this isn't online classes. It's not, okay, you give the test on Monday, you're not going to see the student again until Wednesday, so you have a couple of days to grade. The student can log in at any time, and they're going to want feedback as quick as possible. Plato and Common Core Achieve, the programs that we have through the state of New Mexico, can be very helpful on this, as they can give absolute instantaneous feedback. One place I do want to caution you is that sometimes in online classes, students expect a teacher to function like a computer, in that they expect the teacher to give instantaneous feedback just like the computer program would. And there's where you want to have boundaries defined with your students to say, this is my policy on feedback. It takes me give me up to 48 hours to respond to emails. Give me up to 7 days to grade assignments. Is it really going to take you 7 days to grade the assignment? Hopefully not, but just having those things up front can save you a lot of trouble more at the end. Then you also want to ask yourself, am I willing and able to invest the extra time an online course requires? I've met a lot of teachers over the years that go into online education thinking, oh, it's going to be easier, it's going to be less work. Keep in mind that's not the case. Typically, it's actually going to be even more work than your traditional face-to-face class.
Cash, really quickly, Barbara had a question of how many hours can she expect students to work online?
How many hours can she expect students to work online? That's a really great question. So I can tell you that my course expectation is that I expect a minimum of 9 hours online. The way I arrived at is I consider the GED classes to be equivalent to a 3-credit course in college. For courses in college, a pretty standard rule of thumb is 2 to 3 hours of homework outside of class time. So the way I calculated that is you typically have 3 hours per week in class, and then the 6 hours per week outside of class for homework, for a total of 9 hours. I will tell you that's just what I require. I have a lot of colleagues that think that's excessive. I have students all the time tell me that that's excessive. I know people that require 6 hours per week. I know people that require 3 hours per week. I think that that's something for you to decide more on an ethical level. I think that's also something to discuss within your program. Possibly even consider for the program, we're going to require a student to complete this many hours per week to be considered compliant with the class, because you also run into issues of reporting as well. So Again, I do 9. I don't know that that's necessarily the answer, though.
Well, you know, at our program, we require 8 plus
8.
2 hours in class. So total, we actually require 10, but 8 online. And yes, we have also been told by some other programs that they felt that that was a little excessive, but our face-to-face classes are 12 hours, and that's just in class, not mentioning homework. So we, you know, came up with that as a group. So I definitely agree that as a program, it's good to try to come up with something that you all can agree with, to require of your students.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that, that's good for me to know that that's what you guys are doing in terms of the hour requirements as well. There's a couple of things you have to consider here. I think I see both sides. The reason why I require the 9 hours per week is because I want my students in there working. I think the practicing on your deficiencies, especially in programs such as Plato and Common Core Achieve, is really preparing them well for the GED. So I want to see them working as much as they can each week so that hopefully they'll get their GED that much quicker. I also understand the counter argument that our students, this isn't necessarily the only thing they're doing. We have a very high number of non-traditional students. We have people with children. We have people that are working, just to support themselves. So I realize those things are all issues. So this is definitely a dialogue to have in terms of what is reasonable expectations in terms of student work.
I agree.
So let's see, were there any other questions at this point?
There were none.
Okay, great. So let's talk about technical skills for online teachers. Basic writing, typing, and word processing skills. I'm going to tell you that if you're a hunt and peck typer, I don't know that teaching online is going to be a great idea for you because it's going to be very, very slow. I do recommend pretty minimal typing efficiencies. I would say to shoot for a minimum of 30 GWAM, what is it, gross words a minute, in terms of your typing skills. Word processing skills, I'd say, have a basic understanding of Microsoft Office or the Google, the name is escaping me, the Google Docs and all of that software. Basic understandings there. You need to have electronic presentation skills, be able to do webinars, be able to lead discussions online. You want to have basic web navigation search skills. You want to have a basic understanding of Google. Google can be very helpful because you can see what other teachers are doing in their classes. You want to have good file management skills. Keep in mind what I was saying earlier about you don't necessarily have a face to connect with names, you just have a whole bunch of names. What can happen is you can end up with a whole big old mess of electronic files at the end. And so you want to have some sort of filing system, whether you're printing things out and keeping paper files, or whether you just have a really good organization system within your own drive or within your own computer. You want to have a basic understanding of computer-related storage devices. You want to have knowledge of your school's course management system. For a lot of schools, that's going to be the Learn system, the Blackboard system. Keep in mind Google Classroom is available for anybody who is ABE. You also want to have an idea of how an electronic gradebook functions. As far as electronic gradebooks, I use ingrade.com. I find that to be a very good one. Now, if you don't have these basic skills, it doesn't necessarily mean you're not cut out for online teaching. It just means these are things you need to brush up on a little bit. So I'm going to recommend YouTube as a really good resource. So for example, if you are not sure about zip disks, let's say you've never seen that word before, what I would suggest is just go onto YouTube, www.youtube.com, and just type in there, Introduction to Zip Disks, and just click on the first video that comes up. There's some really great chances to sort of self-educate there. Let's see, going on to the next slide. Facilitation skills for online teachers. You want to engage the student throughout the class, but you really want to focus on engaging the student at the beginning of the class. The very beginning, you want to be sure you're outlining course expectations, that they know what they need to do. You want to be sure and reach out to them and make sure they understand there's an actual live person here. You don't ever want the student to feel like there's not actually a teacher in the class with you. So at the very beginning, I would really try to send them emails, try to have private journals, try to have discussions, really reach out at the beginning in particular. You want to model appropriate questioning, listening, and feedback skills. If you want to learn more about how to model appropriate questioning skills, I'm going to suggest you check out the student engagement webinars related to genuineness and empathy, where I talk about that there. You want the ability to provide direction and support. You always want to be real with your students. Try to say, hey, I think you need to work on this. Hey, I think you could be spending more time here. You need skills in managing online discussions. That's where you want to be sure things don't get out of control. Nobody starts hurling insults. You want to be sure everyone is participating. You want to be sure that you're really paying attention to that kind of things. You want the ability to build online teams. I think any teacher who's done group work knows at times it can be like pulling teeth trying to get students into groups. If that hasn't been your experience, that's great, but that's been my experience in a lot of classes. The students are kind of resistant to teams. I think that can be even more true in the online format. So if you're going to do teams, I just suggest to have a high level of structure for the team and just be very clear with the students about this is not optional, this is the structure I'm expecting. You want to have the ability to promote active learning in the online session. And we're going to have a slide later on that talks about how can you do some active learning techniques in the online sessions. If you do want to learn more about tools that are available on the web for active learning, I'm going to suggest you check out some of the tech talks from our website, the nmdelt.org. Terry and Jamie have put together some great things in terms of that. You want to be sure you accommodate students with different learning styles, just like you would in the traditional classroom. One thing you want to be careful with is when you are uploading photos and graphics to your learning management system, you're going to have the option for what's called alt text, ALT text. You want to be sure you put a description of the visual in there. That's going to help with accessibility. That's going to help with different learning styles. You want to be sure you use appropriate learning theory. Again, good teaching is good teaching regardless of whether you do online or more of a traditional face-to-face format. You want to have a capacity for relationship building. You want to get to know your students a little bit and really reach out to them, trying to overcome the boundary of the computer between you guys. And always, always maintain healthy boundaries. Don't ever cross professional limits that you wouldn't in a face-to-face class. And I do want to caution you on boundaries. Keep in mind in an online class, everything you communicate with the student about, there's some kind of recording of it. If you're sending them an email, there's a written record of that. If you're sending them a video recording, there could be a written record of that. So be very careful about boundaries and what you say to your students, particularly when it is recorded. You also want to have some motivational skills, and that goes back to the cheerleading. And I am going to ask that you look back at some of our previous student engagement webinars if you want to learn more about motivation. We should have some more motivation webinars coming up as part of the student engagement piece. You want to have managerial skills as an online teacher. You want to know how to manage the collaborative groups. If you're assigning group roles, how are you going to stay on top of people? How are you going to monitor if they're doing their part? How are you going to contact them if they're not doing their part? Again, excellent time management. I think I have things about time management throughout this presentation today. I really want to underscore the fact that teaching online is not necessarily a time saver. You need to be able to manage your course materials for different learning styles about, okay, if this is a video, how could I have an option for hands-on learners? And again, I suggest using Google for that. Don't necessarily reinvent the wheel. Look for what's out there for free that's already pretty good, that works, and take advantage of that. You want to be able to coordinate and involve the students in activities. If you get those shy students, you want to be able to reach out to them and just get them involved in the class, make them feel like they're a part of something. You want to know your institutional policies and procedures for implementing an online course. I realize in the New Mexico ABE program, this is kind of the uncharted frontier in a lot of ways, so those policies may not be in place. If they're not, I suggest you talk to your ABE director. If you're working as part of a community college or a university, just be aware a lot of those policies might already be in place, so no need to reinvent those if those policies are in place. You want to know basic legal issues, such as digital copyright. I mean, copyright still applies in an online class. You want to be thinking in terms of FERPA. You want to be thinking in terms of ADA. In terms of ADA compliance, Plato and Common Core Chief, in my experience, have been very good about meeting ADA compliance. In terms of FERPA, be very careful when emailing. The college I work for, the policy is that we don't email student grades in terms of FERPA. So really be aware of these things. Again, be talking to your directors, be talking to your college, stay within those different issues. And as far as managerial skills, again, it goes back to your environment. Within that, I'm referring more to your working environment as far as where is you working, or excuse me, where are you working? Is this conducive to online learning? It's also about having that dialogue with your students and let them know, hey, probably not a good idea to be participating in class at McDonald's. That's the reality of where some students can get internet access, but just letting them understand about what an ideal learning environment would be like. So online teaching, let's talk about some of the benefits. You know, why would you want to teach online? There are a lot of upsides about it. I mentioned earlier, for me, I do most of my online teaching with my dachshund in my lap. That's a big benefit in my mind. There's a lot of flexibility of when and where you teach. Let's say you're a night owl. If you're a night owl and you want to do your online teaching at 2 a.m., you know, you can structure your class in a way that that's going to work for you. The more individual communication with your students, like I said earlier, that's a really good thing to me. I like that. You have the increased documentation. That's really nice in terms of if your students try to come back and say you didn't give them a fair shot. The good thing is there's an electronic record of everything between you and the student, of everything the student has been doing. The benefits, another benefit is just the challenge of trying something new. I like the challenge of trying something new. I don't like to be stagnant in my teaching. I don't like to just teach the same old class over and over again every semester. If you do, I'm not trying to say anything against you. I think that's a perfectly fine teaching technique. But for those of us that like to try something new, that's a real benefit of online teaching. Is there's always new programs, always new technologies, always new ways of doing things. Don't forget the variety of online materials available. There again, we have Plato and Common Core Chief in this state. And again, I want to refer you to the Tech Talks on our NMDELT page. And also the Spanish GED resource page. That has a lot of great resources on there in terms of where can you go. And then, you know, for some teachers, it can just be less anxiety producing to be teaching online. Maybe there's something about not being in the room with your students that's calming to you, or something about not actually interacting with your students face to face that reduces your anxiety. So it can be a very good thing in terms of anxiety for teachers. I want to take a minute and talk about the 7 principles of good teaching. I pulled this from the University of Michigan as my source, just because I really like their website. But these are practices that were initially developed for undergraduate education as your 7 principles, and I think they've just been more generalized to include 7 principles of good teaching overall. They're pretty old. I believe they date back to the 1980s, but in my opinion, they're very sound still. They're still very good principles. So we have good practice encourages student-instructor contact. You want cooperation among your students, active learning, prompt feedback, time on task, high expectations, respecting diverse talents and ways of learning, and it's not reinventing the wheel in terms of online teaching. So as we go through these, we're going to kind of look at how can we take these principles and how can we adapt them to more of an online environment. So our first principle, that student-instructor contact, be aware that knowing a few faculty members, well, really motivates your students. So if you're communicating with your student by email, you know, if it's by a private journal, by a group discussion, if the student feels like they know you, they're going to work harder for you. They're going to be more likely to stay in your class. They're going to be more likely to put in the hours, which is also true in a face-to-face class, of course. You want to define communication structures. You want to let your students know, hey, is it better to contact me by email? Is there some sort of instant messaging route to contact you? Google Hangouts can be a good option. And just defining the students, this is how you can reach me. Social academic contact between students should be encouraged, but boundaries have got to be defined. This is the concept of netiquette. And on our next slide, I'm going to show an example of my personal netiquette policy. I'll also have a resource on there where you can learn more about netiquette. Try to identify who your shy students are. That can be a little difficult in online classes. I would say look for who's not participating in discussions, who hasn't communicated with you, and just recognize, hey, this is a shy student. I'm going to have to be a little more assertive in reaching out to them and getting them to interact. Real-time chat in office hours is very nice to let the students know, hey, you can actually reach me in real time. So maybe say, okay, there's going to be 3 hours a week where I'm available on Instant Messenger. That's where you can reach me in real time, get an instant answer. I do suggest you vary the times and days, as you are going to have people with children, you're going to have people working, and depending on their schedules, they may be taking an online class for the high level of flexibility that it provides. So that, just trying to be available for different students. Discussion boards I absolutely love. That's where maybe you post a topic, let all of the students say something about that topic, and then require the students to respond. One thing I get in math class a lot is, why is math so precise? Why is Plato so picky? Why is Common Core Chief so picky? One of my favorite discussion board questions to post is just say, okay guys, why is math so picky? I'm going to require you to find one example of a reason why math is so picky in the real world. Their responses are just great. I have people that are into bicycles that give me big, long research papers on how saving a couple of grams of weight in a bicycle has a huge effect. And it's just amazing how this can be a way to get students to make the connection that this math does indeed apply in their real life. As far as discussion board topics, again, I'm going to refer to Google. Just get into Google and type in discussion board topics for online classes. You're going to get all kinds of stuff to come up. I absolutely love e-journals. I actually, in my online classes, I use both discussion boards and e-journals. The discussion boards are going to be something public. That's something all of your classmates can see. It's very public when you respond to the student, versus the journal is more private. And I actually do require both. I find, in my experience, that students will typically disclose more in a private journal than they will on a discussion board. But there's also things they'll reveal their classmates in a discussion board they necessarily won't tell you as a teacher, so I think it's helpful to have both. And there's a ton of media platforms you can do for this. Again, we'll be providing more training on this. I suggest you look into Google at this point if you want to know more. So I'm going to hear my sample netiquette policy, and this is exactly, I hate when people just put word goop on PowerPoints like this, but that's exactly what I did. And I just wanted to put my whole policy on here, and I'll be making this PowerPoint public, so you're more than welcome to see this policy in more detail if you want. I have in this first section here, I really just try to outline respecting diversity, respecting your fellow classmates. I'm just trying to let people know, hey, if you say mean things to your classmates, we're going to have a problem. You're going to have to deal with me. Down here, I talk about college writing styles and what's appropriate. Now, I'm a math teacher. I'm not an English teacher. I'm not a grammar teacher. I still try to model appropriate grammar. I still try to model appropriate sentence structure. And I have those same expectations from my students. One thing I highly suggest addressing is text abbreviations. Things like the emoticons, or you see, I saw the JK, which stands for just kidding, LOL, which stands for laugh out loud, the smiley face. Those things I don't think are appropriate in the college setting. It's kind of like the work requirement as far as Plato or Common Core Achieve. I don't think there's an answer in terms of whether or not this is okay. Just in my opinion, I'm trying to teach them to write on a more academic level. That's why I don't allow that. Interestingly, if you ever do get an abbreviation like JK or LOL and you're not sure what it actually means, a really good resource for that is urbandictionary.com. So if you're ever not sure what something means, go to urbandictionary.com, and it can translate these sort of slang things for those of us that maybe aren't as hip to text message lingo. Down here I have included a link that has more information about Netiquette. I highly suggest checking this out. It goes into a lot more detail about things you might want to consider in your Netiquette policy. And again, this is just my personal Netiquette policy that I give to my students. Back to the 7 principles, I'm talking about cooperation among students. Just like if the student knows the teachers well, if the students know each other well, that's going to motivate them a little more. You have study groups, group problem solving, article discussions. Keep in mind these things can all be moved to the online format. Things like wikis can be very useful for this. Having student group emails can be very useful for this. Just a lot of different things. If you'd like more information about platforms that can do this, I'm going to suggest you check out the student engagement webinar related to social media in the classroom. The literature indicates that it's best practice to try to create a team identity. So if you label a team of people, have them name the team, have them give the team a personality. Not something that I've done personally in my classes, but from what I'm reading, it sounds like that's a very good technique. Defining team roles, I like to define team roles in a face-to-face class. I think it's even more important in the online class. You don't want one person doing all the work where everybody is getting credit. I suggest trying to grade people separately. So tell the facilitator, this is your role. I will be grading you based on whether or not you facilitate. Tell the recorder, this is your role. I am going to be grading you on how you do recording. That way everybody's individually responsible, but you're still creating the group collaboration, the sense of a team. You want to provide a public and private space to work. So I suggest, give the team a space to work on, maybe a discussion board, maybe a wiki, something that you have access to, but then also give them the opportunity to communicate by email, maybe with things that you're not going to moderate. Just be aware if you do that, sometimes students will kind of create drama on the side. I would suggest just dealing with that as it comes. If they're creating drama on the side, that's a violation of the Netiquette policy, and that's how I suggest addressing that. And computer-based communication skills encourage spontaneous communication between students. Interestingly, back in the late 90s, when the studies were initially being done on online education, it looks like the researchers were shocked at how spontaneous communication could be, that people would just jump on the IN and throw each other a message really quick. And you think about the world we live in, we do text messaging that's very spontaneous. Things like Facebook Messenger can be very spontaneous. In a lot of ways, allowing these spontaneous communication mechanisms between students is just embracing the current culture we live in. So that is suggested. As far as active learning, think experiential, hands-on, or participative, and inquiry-based. I've given some examples of how you can have activities that foster this in online classes. Find a website with some animations, find some kind of virtual labs. I know Plato in particular has a virtual lab aspect of it. Graphing technologies, be that a graphing calculator, be that a website that does graphing with the student. You can have them role play with you, the instructor. You can have them role play with one another. Project-based learning, I tend to teach word problems and portfolios online. And believe it or not, I get pretty positive feedback from my students on that. You have case studies. Maybe you take a case study and actually post it to the class itself. Maybe you give a link and have the students go see case studies on external websites. Again, there's the portfolio analysis activities. Maybe take some kind of analysis activity you do in class and adapt it to the online format. Do virtual field trips. I've seen some pretty interesting things related to doing virtual field trips on Google Earth. Again, this is very much about thinking outside of the box. You can find a lot of games. Sometimes you can find games that make math kind of fun. Maybe the student's going through and they're building an avatar, and every question they get right, their avatar gets a little bigger, or their avatar gets a little prettier, or their avatar gets a little more customizable. And just kind of thinking of the world our students live in and trying to embrace that. There can be online expert interviews. I've never actually set that kind of thing up. I think it's a great idea though. You can have reaction panels, maybe have a video or something, and have your students log in together in groups at the same time and react to it. It can be online discussions. There's just so much you can do here. Again, it's about really trying to be creative and going back to Google, look at what other teachers are doing. If you find something that other teachers are doing that works, by all means, use that as long as you're not violating copyright. Computer simulations of techniques can be nice. I remember particularly when I was younger, doing a computer simulation of flying an airplane. I don't know if I actually could fly an airplane, but I know I was pretty good at the simulator. There's a lot of simulators out there that involve real-world applications. Just be kind of looking for those kind of things. And again, I do want to consider, I want you to consider checking out the Tech Talks webinars. A lot of really good suggestions for things you can do in there. Terry Gustafson, one of the master teachers, is very good at finding online resources. She just amazes me at her ability to find online resources. Please consider reaching out to her if you want to look for free resources. And her contact information is available on the nmdelt.org page. Prompt feedback. You want mechanisms for the feedback. If you're taking papers, do you want to email a graded paper back to a student? I'm a little nervous about emailing graded things. I'm a little bit nervous in terms of FERPA on that. My feeling with FERPA is that I'm very conservative. If in doubt, I'm just not going to do it. So, do you want something more secure through Google Classroom? Do you want something more secure through your school's learning management system, if that's an option? So, you really want to establish a student, how am I going to give you feedback? Keep in mind the student expectations of immediate feedback. They're not always reasonable. They're not always realistic about that. Establishing policies for feedback, just letting the students know this is what my feedback is going to look like. This is how long it could take. Keep in mind the immediate feedback aspect of Plato and Common Core 2. Something students really, really like. High expectations. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy in a lot of cases. If you think a student is going to fail, you might be right. You're encouraging them to fail by creating that self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's why it's important in online education to always encourage high expectations. Keep in mind when you have a conversation with a student face-to-face, there's nonverbal things happening. And so the student can see your nonverbals. Keep in mind when you have a student face-to-face that you're talking to, you have the conversation, then it's over. When you're having a conversation with a student in an online setting, there's a written record. The student has that email to stress over. The student has that email to pick apart words and try to read between the lines and try to read things that aren't there. That's why you really, in an online course, want to be sure you're communicating high expectations, is so that the students don't inadvertently think you don't have high expectations, even when that's not necessarily what you mean to say. Explicit expectations, again, about the time requirement. Barbara, that was a great question about the time earlier. You want lots of detail in written instructions. When in doubt, I say provide them too much detail. And be sure to let the students know, hey, if anything is not clear, definitely email the instructor or reach out to the instructor. I recommend providing a grading rubric. You don't want it to be, oh, surprise, this is how I decided to grade you. And again, this is also true in online classes. Grading rubrics are just good practice. I provided a sample rubric that I use with my students that they actually really like. What I do is I make each problem worth 10 points, and these are things that I hand grade. So I give them 2 points if they restate the problem in their own words. I give them 2 points if they identify the unknowns. I give them 2 points if they write a plan for solving this. The thing I really like about having the student write a plan is that gets them thinking about their problem-solving techniques. That gets them in the habit of thinking ahead. That can also open the dialogue in terms of what do you think its problem-solving techniques are. So where you can teach them this is a good way to approach something you don't know. I give 2 points for the student carrying out their plan. That's really where they have to show me their work. And then I only give 1 point for the correct answer. My idea here is I don't want the student to stress so much about the correct answer as much as showing me the process, so that allows us to identify, hey, this is where you're making mistakes. This is what you can be doing different. Just having an answer doesn't necessarily tell me that, and that can be a problem in online teaching, is sometimes you only have the answer. Sometimes it is hard to see the student's work. The final point I give them is I want them to explain to me why the answer is reasonable. Again, trying to encourage that critical thinking on the part of the student. Respecting diverse ways of learning, definitely adapting questions used in class. If you have something that works well in class, try to adapt it to the online format. If you're not sure how to do that, I'm a good resource for that. You might shoot me an email and say, hey, do you have any ideas of how to adapt this? I would be glad to help you. Collaborative and group learning, some people like to work with other people. Some people like to work alone. That's one way of respecting the diversity. Giving a high level of self-evaluation for the students, trying to teach them to monitor, how is the quality of your work, how are you managing your time, and trying to build that in the student. That also gives them a sense of control. Same thing with self-paced learning. Again, that gives them the sense of control. This is where some of these newer programs, such as Plato and Common Core Achieve, are very nice, is because they do have options where you can let the student self-pace more. If a student is going to spend lots of time and really learn topics quickly, they have the option to do that. If the student really needs to slow down and take their time, again, they have options to do that. So, do you need assistance? Do you want to learn more? When I do these webinars, sometimes I think it leads to more questions than answers because I present things to you as you go through and implement this. I know that things are going to come up. So I want you guys to be sure and remember that we are here to help. Here at DELT, we provide support related to distance education. We provide support related to Plato and Common Core Achieve. We can help you with Quality Matters, Google Classroom, Google Docs. There's the word I couldn't think of earlier, Google Docs. nmdelt.org, our website I've mentioned so many times. If you haven't already, please like us on Facebook. As the team finds good resources, we'll share that on Facebook. I think you'll find lots of interesting things there. There's my contact information, cclifton4@cnm.edu. There's Jamie's contact, jamie@nmdelt.org. Please keep in mind Jamie's also one of the master teachers, and she's here to help. Our next student engagement webinar is tentatively scheduled for Friday, October 9th, 2015. I'm not quite sure on the time yet. It's going to depend on kind of people's availability, what kind of turnouts are we having for the webinars at the different times. And then finally, here's just a list of some of my references if you'd like any more information about what all we've covered today. Does anyone have questions or comments for me at this point?
I will unmute Barbara, but there were a couple of questions from Melody Simpson, who is watching the webinar right now. She asked, can we use the Quality Matters rubric you are showing, or is it copyright?
It would depend on what capacity you're using it in. I know you would not want to claim it as your own work, of course. I'm not sure about pulling the actual Quality Matters rubric and the format Quality Matters uses off their website, if that would be copyright violation or not. But as far as the actual material in the Quality Matters rubric, that is public information. You can go to qualitymatters.org. That is available to anybody. So as far as these standards, using those and using the wording on those, no, I do not believe that would be a copyright violation.
Thank you. And she also made a suggestion that now you're going to have to teach everyone how to create a wiki.
How to create a wiki. Yes, I highly encourage you to check out my beginner's guide to social media on the DELT website. I have a little bit on the wikis there. There's a series on YouTube. It's called Social Media in Plain English, and I have links to that. So on YouTube, if you do wikis in plain English, and let me actually type that on the screen here. Wikis in plain English, if I can spell, on Google Classroom is a great starting place to learn about wikis. And I will definitely take that into consideration for my next webinar. Maybe that would be something good to talk about, is how you actually do all of these things. And by the way, if there ever is a topic you would like me to do a webinar on, please feel free to shoot me an email. I'm definitely open to trying to tailor these to what your needs are. Jamie, are there any other questions or comments?
I'm actually going to, whoops, I'm sorry, I was sharing Barbara's screen there for a second. I'm going to try to unmute Barbara. Maybe, Barbara, you've muted yourself, just in case she had any questions. I think that the question you were wanting me to repeat, though, Barbara, because I also heard the echo, was Melody Simpson, who is watching the video, was wondering if the Quality Matters rubric is able to be used or if there was a copyright rule. So that was the question that Cash was answering, as well as how to create a wiki, which is the second question.
I think I answered those. If I wasn't clear on anything, please type that in your chat box.
Barbara says she does not have any questions, so
okay.
I believe that is all.
Well, it was a small group today. That makes it a little easier to make sure everybody had a chance to ask questions. If I didn't answer anything, please shoot me an email. Please feel free to be in contact with me. And I very much want to thank you for your time.
Thank you all very much, and have a great weekend.